The oil lamp shattered against the saloon bar, and within 3 seconds the entire back wall of the set was a curtain of orange flame climbing toward the rafters, where 2 riggers were still working. Wait, because what John Wayne chooses to do while everyone else is running for the exits will force the studio to make a decision they've been avoiding for years. The night shoot had been going smoothly until it wasn't. They were filming on Stage 7 at the studio lot, a cavernous building that housed one of the most elaborate saloon sets ever built for a Western picture. 3 weeks of construction had gone into every detail: the carved mahogany bar that stretched 30 feet along one wall, the brass rail polished until it gleamed under the lights, the chandelier made of actual crystal that had been imported from a supplier in Chicago, the balcony where the dance hall girls would make their entrance in flowing gowns of red and gold. The set decorator had been nominated for an Academy Award twice, and this was his masterpiece. It was beautiful, authentic, the kind of craftsmanship that made audiences believe they were really looking at a frontier saloon from 1885. It was also, as everyone was about to discover, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from, and what time is it right now? John Wayne had been standing at the bar, running through his blocking for a scene where his character would confront the corrupt saloon owner. The dialogue was simple, the staging straightforward. They'd already done 2 takes. And the director, a meticulous man named Franklin Pierce, who had a reputation for shooting until he got exactly what he wanted, was setting up for a third when everything changed. The lamp that started it all was a period-accurate oil lamp, one of a dozen that lined the bar to give the scene authentic lighting. The production designer had insisted on real oil lamps because, he argued, the flicker of actual flame gave a warmth to the image that electric replicas couldn't match. It was the kind of artistic decision that sounded reasonable in a meeting room and became catastrophic in practice. A grip named Cody Marshall was adjusting a bounce board near the end of the bar when his elbow caught the lamp's base. It happened in slow motion and fast forward at the same time. The lamp tilting on its base, the glass chimney separating from the reservoir, the burning wick and hot oil spilling across the lacquered bar top in a spreading pool of fire. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the varnish caught. Look at the faces of the people in that saloon set in the moment the fire started. Because what you see tells you everything about what comes next. There's confusion first. The human brain takes a moment to process something so unexpected, so out of place in a controlled environment. Then recognition, then fear. The flames spread faster than anyone thought possible. The bar varnish led the fire along the entire length of the counter in seconds, and from there it jumped to the decorative bunting that hung behind the bar. The bunting was supposed to be fire retardant. It wasn't. Someone had cut corners somewhere, substituted cheaper material that looked the same but burned like paper soaked in kerosene. Fire! Everyone out! Move! The assistant director's voice cut through the shock, and suddenly everyone was in motion. Extras in period costumes scrambled for the main doors. Camera operators grabbed what equipment they could. The sound team abandoned all their gear entirely. In the chaos of bodies rushing for the exits, nobody was counting heads. Nobody was making sure everyone got out. Nobody except John Wayne. Notice what he does in the first 5 seconds after the fire starts, because it tells you something about the man that 1,000 movie roles never could. While everyone else's instincts are screaming run, Wayne's instincts are asking a different question: who's still inside? His eyes swept the set with the practiced awareness of a man who'd spent decades on film productions, who knew where every crew member was supposed to be at every moment. The extras were moving toward the exits. Good. The camera crew was pulling back. Good. The director and his team were already near the main doors. Good. But the balcony, the 2 riggers, who had been adjusting lights on the balcony, where were they? Wayne looked up through the thickening smoke and saw them, Danny Chen and Marcus Webb, Two young men in their 20s were trapped on the balcony, with no way down. The main staircase was already engulfed in flames, and the fire was climbing toward them faster than they could find another exit. "The balcony," Wayne shouted, pointing upward. "There's men up there." But his voice was lost in the roar of the fire and the thunder of running feet. People were still pouring out of the stage doors, focused only on escape, deaf to anything but their own survival. Wait, because this is the moment that separates what happened from what could have happened. Wayne didn't run for the exit. He ran toward the fire. The heat hit him like a physical wall as he pushed deeper into the burning set. The air was already thick with smoke, black and acrid, making every breath feel like inhaling razors dipped in ash. His eyes watered so badly that he could barely see. His skin prickled and then burned with the intensity of the heat, the exposed skin on his hands and face feeling like it was being pressed against a hot stove. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn around, to save himself, to let someone else handle this. The primitive part of his brain that had kept humans alive for millennia was demanding retreat, flooding his system with the chemicals of fear and the overwhelming urge to flee. He kept moving. There was a service ladder on the far side of the set, a metal ladder that the riggers used to access the balcony from behind the false wall. If Wayne could reach it, if the fire hadn't already cut off that route, he might be able to get to Danny and Marcus before the flames did. The smoke was so thick now that Wayne could barely see 3 feet in front of him. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, a gesture that would later be described as pure Western instinct by the reporters who covered the story, and pressed forward, one hand trailing along the wall to guide him. Stop for a second and picture this scene from above. The saloon set is a rectangle of flame and shadow, with the fire concentrated at the front, where the bar used to be, and spreading outward in every direction. Near the back wall, almost invisible in the smoke, a single figure is moving against the tide of evacuation, pushing toward the one corner where a metal ladder offers a path to the trapped men above. Wayne found the ladder more by feel than by sight. His hands closed around the metal rungs, hot, painfully hot, but not yet impossible to grip, and he started climbing. Above him, he could hear shouting. Danny and Marcus had spotted him coming, and their voices cut through the roar of the fire with desperate hope. "Mr. Wayne, over here, we can't get down." "I'm coming," Wayne shouted back, his voice raw from the smoke. "Stay low, stay away from the rail." The ladder seemed to go on forever. 10 feet, 15, 20. Wayne's lungs were burning, his eyes streaming, his hands blistering against the hot metal, but he kept climbing, one rung at a time, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant those 2 young men would die too. He reached the top of the ladder and pulled himself onto the narrow catwalk that ran behind the balcony. Danny and Marcus were huddled against the back wall, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with terror. "This way," Wayne said, gesturing toward the ladder, "one at a time. Danny, you first. Go." Danny hesitated, looking at the smoke billowing up from below, at the flames that were now licking at the edge of the balcony. "Go." Wayne's voice left no room for argument. "Now, listen, because what happens in the next 60 seconds will define how everyone remembers this night." Danny went. He scrambled down the ladder with the desperate speed of a man who knows that every second counts. Marcus followed, with Wayne bringing up the rear, moving slower now, because his hands were screaming with pain, and the smoke was so thick he could barely see the rungs beneath his feet. They reached the bottom of the ladder, just as a section of the balcony collapsed behind them, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris down to the floor below. If they had been 30 seconds slower, they would have been standing on that balcony when it fell. But they weren't out yet. The fire had spread while Wayne was climbing, and now the path to the exit was blocked by a wall of flame. "The back door," Wayne said, his voice barely a whisper now. "Storage area. there's a door." He didn't wait for them to respond. He just started moving, and Danny and Marcus followed, trusting the man who had come into the fire to save them. The storage area at the back of Stage 7 was a cluttered maze of props and set pieces, barely visible through the smoke that seemed to follow them like a living thing. Wooden furniture from a dozen different productions, painted flat stacked against the walls, boxes of costumes and accessories that no one had sorted in years. Wayne navigated by memory and instinct, his bandaged hands trailing along whatever surfaces he could find, leading the two young men through a labyrinth of obstacles until they reached a metal door that Wayne prayed would open. It did. The door swung outward into the cool California night air, and suddenly they were outside, gasping and coughing and spitting black phlegm, and miraculously, impossibly, wonderfully alive. Remember what I said about decisions the studio had been avoiding? This is where that story begins. The fire department arrived within minutes, but by the time they got the blaze under control, Stage 7 was a total loss. The saloon set, 3 weeks of construction, and hundreds of thousands of dollars, was nothing but ash and twisted metal. But everyone was alive. Every single person who had been inside when the fire started had made it out. That should have been the end of the story. A close call, a dramatic rescue, a happy ending. But Wayne wasn't satisfied with happy endings that papered over ugly truths. The next morning, while the insurance adjusters were still picking through the wreckage, Wayne called a meeting, not with the director or the producers, with the studio head himself, a man named Arthur Caldwell, who had run the studio for 15 years and wasn't used to being summoned by actors, even stars of Wayne's caliber. They met in Caldwell's private office, a cathedral of polished wood and leather furniture, designed to remind visitors who held the power. Wayne walked in with his hands wrapped in white bandages, second-degree burns on both palms, painful but not permanent, and took a seat without being invited. "We need to talk about what happened last night," Wayne said. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "It was a terrible accident. Thank God everyone got out safely." "I understand. We have you to thank for that." "It wasn't an accident." The words hung in the air between them. Caldwell's neutral expression flickered. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean someone substituted cheap bunting for the fire-retardant material that was supposed to be behind that bar. I mean those oil lamps were real, burning actual oil, when they should have been electric replicas with flame effects. I mean there was no fire safety officer on set last night, even though union rules require one for any night shoot with open flames." Wayne leaned forward, his bandaged hands flat on Caldwell's desk. "I mean this wasn't an accident. This was negligence, and I want to know who's responsible." Notice how Caldwell's face changes as Wayne speaks. The neutral expression hardens into something defensive, then calculating. This isn't a conversation he expected to have, and he's rapidly reassessing how to handle it. "John," Caldwell said, using the first name like a weapon of familiarity, "I understand you're upset. What you did last night was heroic, and I'm sure the stress of the situation." "Don't." Wayne's voice was quiet, but it stopped Caldwell cold. "Don't try to manage me. Don't try to spin this. 2 men almost died last night because someone decided that safety cost too much. I want to know who made that decision, and I want to know what you're going to do about it." "Wait, because this is where the story turns from a rescue into a reckoning." Caldwell was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its smooth corporate polish. "What exactly do you want, John?" "I want an investigation. A real one, not an internal review that concludes nobody did anything wrong. I want the fire marshal involved. I want union safety inspectors on this lot, going over every stage, every set, every production." Wayne paused. "And I want the person who authorized those cost-cutting measures fired, not reassigned." "Fired? That could be very expensive. 2 lives are worth more than money." The conversation went on for another hour, But the outcome was decided in that first exchange. Wayne had leverage. He was the biggest star on the studio's roster, the face of half their upcoming pictures, and he was willing to use it. Caldwell could refuse his demands, but the cost of that refusal would be Wayne walking off the lot and taking his box office power with him. In the end, Caldwell agreed. An investigation, fire marshals, union inspectors, and a production manager named Harold Sims, who had signed off on the cheap bunting and the real oil lamps, was terminated the following week. But Wayne wasn't finished. Listen carefully, because what Wayne does next is the part of the story that most people never heard. The two riggers he saved, Danny Chen and Marcus Webb, were both in the hospital recovering from smoke inhalation. Wayne visited them on the second day after the fire, bringing flowers for their families, and something else, a proposal. The union's been trying to get stronger fire safety standards for years, Wayne told them. The studios always fight it because it costs money. But right now, after what happened, there's momentum. People are paying attention, and the two of you could be the faces of that fight. Danny and Marcus looked at each other, then back at Wayne. What would we have to do? Danny asked. Tell your story. To the union, to the press, to anyone who'll listen. Talk about what it felt like to be trapped up there, watching the fire climb toward you. Talk about how close you came to dying because someone wanted to save a few dollars on fabric. Wayne's voice was gentle, but there was steel beneath it. I know it's asking a lot. I know you might face pushback from the studio, but this is a chance to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. The two young men agreed. Over the following weeks, they gave interviews, testified before union committees, and became the public face of a campaign for stronger fire safety standards in Hollywood productions. Wayne supported them every step of the way. He spoke at union meetings. He gave his own interviews, showing his bandaged hands to cameras and describing what he'd seen inside that burning stage. He used every ounce of his celebrity to amplify the message. Safety wasn't optional, and the people who cut corners with lives should be held accountable. Before we go any further, you need to understand why this mattered so much to Wayne. It wasn't just about this one fire or these two men. It was about something that had been building in him for years, a frustration with the way Hollywood treated the people who actually made the movies while the studios counted their profits. Wayne had seen too many close calls over his career. Stuntmen injured because safety pads were too expensive. Extras working in dangerous conditions because productions were running behind schedule. Camera operators put in harm's way because the shot was more important than the person getting it. Every time the studios promised to do better. Every time the promises evaporated as soon as the attention faded. This time, Wayne decided, would be different. The campaign for fire safety standards succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Within 6 months, the major studios had agreed to a new set of protocols, mandatory fire safety officers on any set using flames or pyrotechnics, regular inspections of all standing sets, and strict penalties for productions that violated the rules. It wasn't perfect. No system is, but it was better than what had come before. And Danny Chen and Marcus Webb were alive to see it happen, because John Wayne had run into a burning building instead of away from it. Notice what happened here, because it's easy to miss if you're only looking at the dramatic rescue. The rescue was important. It saved 2 lives directly, but the fight that came after saved countless more. People who would never know Wayne's name, but who would go home safely from film sets for decades to come, because someone decided that being a hero didn't end when the fire was out. The picture that had been shooting on Stage 7 was delayed by 3 months while a new set was built. When production resumed, it was on a stage that had been completely overhauled to meet the new safety standards. Fire extinguishers every 20 feet, sprinkler systems in the rafters, electric flame effects instead of real fire, a full-time safety coordinator who had the authority to shut down any scene that violated protocols. The first day back on set, Wayne walked through the new saloon and looked at every safety feature with the critical eye of a man who understood what it had cost to put them there. The director, Franklin Pierce, walked beside him. "It's not as authentic," Pierce said, gesturing at the electric flames that flickered in the new lamps. "The old ones had a quality that you just can't replicate." Wayne looked at him for a long moment. "You know what else the old ones had? The ability to kill people." He turned back to the set. "This is better. We'll make it work. Remember the loops we opened? Here's where they start to close." Danny Chen and Marcus Webb both recovered fully from their injuries. Danny went on to become one of the most respected gaffers in the industry, known for his meticulous attention to electrical safety. He worked on over 100 productions over the next 30 years, and on every single one, he made sure that the lighting equipment was properly grounded, the cables were correctly rated, and the crew knew where the fire extinguishers were located. Marcus took a different path. The experience on Stage 7 had shaken something loose in him, a realization that life was too short to spend in the rafters of movie sets. He left the industry a year after the fire and went back to school, eventually becoming a fire safety inspector for the city of Los Angeles. In that role, he inspected film productions regularly, applying standards that he had helped to create and carrying the memory of that night in every clipboard and checklist. Wait, because there's one more thread to this story, and it's the one that matters most. 10 years after the fire, the studio that had employed Harold Sims, the production manager who had authorized the cost-cutting that nearly killed 2 men, was celebrating its 50th anniversary. As part of the celebration, they commissioned a documentary about the studio's history, including interviews with the biggest stars who had worked there over the decades. Wayne agreed to participate. At 70 years old, his health was beginning to fail, but his memory was sharp, and his opinions were as strong as ever. The interviewer asked him about his most memorable moment on the lot, expecting to hear about a famous scene or a legendary director. Instead, Wayne talked about the fire. "That night taught me something I should have understood a long time ago," Wayne said, his voice rougher now with age, but still carrying the authority it always had. "In this business, we create illusions. We make people believe things that aren't real, and sometimes we get so caught up in the illusion that we forget there are real people behind it, real lives at stake." He paused, looking at something the camera couldn't see. "I ran into that fire because 2 young men were going to die if I didn't. That part was instinct. But what came after, the fight for better safety, the accountability for the people who cut corners, that was a choice. And it's the choice I'm prouder of than any role I ever played." The interviewer asked if he had any regrets about how he'd handled the situation. Wayne shook his head. "My only regret is that it took a near tragedy to make me act. There were warning signs before that night. Close calls that should have been wake-up calls. I saw them, and I didn't do anything." His jaw tightened. "I won't make that mistake again. Listen, because this is the part of the story that connects to something larger than one fire on one night. After Wayne's death in 1979, the industry he had fought to change continued to evolve. Safety standards improved, technology advanced. The Wild West days of filmmaking, when lives were routinely risked for the sake of a shot, gradually gave way to a more professional approach that valued human safety alongside artistic vision. Not everyone remembered why those changes had happened. Not everyone knew the names Danny Chen and Marcus Webb, or the production manager who had been fired, or the studio head who had been forced to choose between accountability and losing his biggest star. But the changes endured, and every person who went home safely from a film set carried the benefit of that night without knowing it. Danny Chen died in 2015. Surrounded by his family, at his memorial service, his son himself, a filmmaker, told the story of the night his father had almost died on Stage 7, and the man who had come through the flames to save him. My father never forgot what John Wayne did for him, the son said. Not just the rescue, though that was remarkable enough. What he never forgot was what came after, the way Wayne used his power to force change, to protect people who didn't have the power to protect themselves. That's the lesson my father carried with him for the rest of his life, and it's the lesson he passed on to me. Marcus Webb attended the memorial. He was in his 80s now, retired from the fire department, but still sharp. After the service, he found Danny's son and shook his hand. Your father was a good man, Marcus said, and Wayne was right about him. He used what happened to him to make things better for everyone who came after. That's the real legacy of that night. Not the fire, not even the rescue. The legacy is every person who went home safe, because Danny and your father's father decided that their story mattered enough to tell. If you've made it this far, you've heard a story about fire and courage, and the fight that comes after the flames go out. But here's what I want you to think about. How many times have you seen something wrong and stayed silent because speaking up seemed too hard? How many times have you had the chance to use whatever power you have, whether it's the power of a movie star or just the power of your own voice, to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves? The fire on stage 7 lasted less than an hour. The changes it sparked lasted for generations. And it all started because one man decided that running into the flames was just the beginning, not the end. If you want to hear what happened when John Wayne testified before Congress about workplace safety in the film industry, because yes, that happened too, 3 years after the fire, tell me in the comments. Some stories don't end when the credits roll. Some stories are still being written, one safety regulation at a time, by people who never forgot what it costs when we put profits ahead of people. And if Danny Chen and Marcus Webb could see what their survival set in motion, not just their own careers, but the countless lives saved by the standards they helped create, I think they would both smile, not because they became famous, but because their near-death meant something, because someone decided that saving their lives was just the first step, and the real work was making sure no one else had to be saved the same way. That's the part they don't put in the movies. But maybe it's the most important part of it all.